This edition of the Lloyd's List podcast is brought to you by Vesson.
Some shipowners warn that cruise supply is only set to get worse due to a lack of young people choosing a career at sea. Others are concerned about the need to upskill existing crews to handle increasing digitalisation and multiple fuel types. This comes during a period of growth in the merchant vessel fleet because of a new shipbuilding supercycle and limited vessel recycling. Most industry insiders agree that the talent shortage is already becoming a serious problem for the industry. Meanwhile, the switch to recruiting shipboard personnel, chiefly from the Indian subcontinent and Southeast Asia since the 1980s, means there are fewer people able to fill the many Western Shore-based roles requiring previous seafaring experience. As competition for crew has increased, more ship owners are taking action to increase the attractiveness of a seafaring career. These include improved crew accommodation, better internet connectivity and more flexible or shorter working contracts. All of these can be effective ways to reduce attrition. So what more needs to be done to ensure a continued supply of skilled seafarers and attract young people to the industry to operate the global vessel fleet? Joining us on this week's podcast are Julia Anastasio, Chief Crew Management Officer at OSM Tome, and Raul Harris, Chief Creative Officer at Ocean Technologies.
Well, there's definitely no doubt that, first of all, there is a shortage of talent. But that also depends on several factors. Some of those factors include the growth of certain segments, so the order books and how prevalent those growth aspirations are within the individual segments. Then, of course, there's the complexity within each individual segment, especially for the more niche markets. Then we're looking at various other factors, such as taxation for local seafarers, depending on the trading areas or the flag requirements. There's, of course, one of the more serious issues, which is criminalization in our industry. That tends to act as a deterrent for young talent to seek future career opportunities within this industry. Then I would continue and look at minimum wage implementation, access to education, and various other deterrents that would add to the shortage that we're currently seeing today. What we also see is a concerning growing number of cadets and interns available in the market today, but without any future prospects, where owners are not offering berths for sea time. And therefore, we're seeing, just as one example that I heard recently, over 40,000 cadets alone available in the Philippines without any prospects. And that is a shockingly high number. We also see a lack of quality training, and cadets that do not have these available berths end up also creating a very bad reputation for the industry. So the industry is therefore training far more cadets on land than it has space for on their ships, and that itself is an issue. When I look at the Philippines again and those that have graduated from the maritime schools, every year we see only roughly 5,000 will ever get that opportunity. So something has to fundamentally change in order for us to reverse the scarcity that we're seeing today and the effects of how we are actually creating this challenge for ourselves. A similar issue was seen in India, where again, we're looking at numbers as high as this, maybe even higher than this. So it is a collective and challenge that we're seeing globally. It's not just focused on the major seafaring nations as such. The real problem, of course, is the quality of the training that we have. And that is also a problem in itself, where they reach a certain level, are seafarers, but then, of course, they're not successful in continuing their career for whatever reason. So that is also adding to the current shortage that we see today.
Meanwhile, new ships are becoming increasingly complex, and there is a need to upskill crews to deal with increasing digitalisation and alternative fuels. Raoul Harris of Ocean Technologies Group believes all ship owners will need to improve training to adapt to this more complex environment.
Well, I think there's a few different dimensions to it, and you're right. I think you're right to kind of connect the two, the what's happening in new fuels and digitalization. I think it's a mistake sometimes to look at them differently, because they're both certainly knock into each other in terms of what's going on. It's really certainly from the way that we're looking at it, it's really about finding candidates that can work in an increasingly complex environment. And I think that when it comes to crewing, I think it's under strain more generally to find people who are able to sort of worked in the way that we've sort of been used to, and then that problem is then further exacerbated by those demands for candidates sort of going up in terms of the skills profile and to a certain extent as well. I think it's interesting that it's not really enough in that new era that we're going into, where there is such amount of sort of change, to sort of go with the previous approach that you might have done with trying to find crew. And by that I mean there's a number of different things we can look at there. One is the profile of people that you need. The history of our industry has been in sort of the learning is all front loaded, and you know pretty much, and then you might do a couple of courses or something when you want to undertake a new role or something specific, but fundamentally, you know, your education all happens at the start. And that's under strain everywhere, not just in shipping. This idea that we moved more to a sort of lifelong learning approach, and to a certain extent those kind of problem solving skills, I think, are something that we're looking for that we perhaps weren't looking for before. And then on top of that, you also got, as well as the ability to sort of solve problems, there's increasing weight on emotional intelligence and those kind of what were called traditionally soft skills, I think now more sort of respectfully named non-technical skills. So the idea there being that we're much more focused on mental health, we're much more focused on the sort of cultures that we want to kind of create, and to create the kind of environments people want to work in, and so that's kind of changing the sort of profile as well. So I think that when it comes to specifically answer your question about what's happening with the recruitment side of things, certainly from our point of view, we're looking at it much more in terms of you've got the technical skills that you'll do as your pre-assessment, but then things like behavior profiling and even personality profiling are becoming more and more important.
Keeping the seafarers we already have and attracting new ones to the sector is increasingly less to do with salary, although that remains important. Employees are demanding better conditions on board and shorter contract durations, for example.
Generally speaking, vessel sectors which provide greater employment packages to the seafarers are those that will be more attractive. So rather than first focus on the sectors themselves, I would rather focus on the employment packages that are generating more attraction. So when I say employment package, I'm not necessarily referring just to salary alone, but more importantly, connectivity, shorter contract durations, industry standard terms and conditions of contract, modern living conditions, and of course, and probably most importantly, a safe working environment where the conditions of the vessels are at the standard that is required, of course. In terms of ESG and DEI, the work environment and company policies, the culture and values play quite a fundamental role in terms of how the seafarer will be treated, developed, and of course offered future growth opportunities. Well-being is critical, and a seafarer will be attracted to a company that has their well-being as a priority at the center of their organization. So that is really, really important here and a fundamental point. Finally, when considering salary benefits, which for me is actually the least important, because today we see more or less a standardization of wages that, when benchmarked per segment and per geographical region, have more or less similar offerings. So again, going then back to the actual sectors themselves, again, And I have to say, generally speaking, the more complex the operation, the higher the wages. And those who wish to seek employment opportunities where the main factor is salary would then strive for senior positions within the wet, the gas, and the offshore segments, as opposed to the dry, container, bulk, and so on and so forth.
From multi-jurisdictional regulations to geopolitics and decarbonisation, the maritime industry is more complex than ever. This is creating unprecedented levels of risk exposure. With trusted maritime data and built-for-purpose workflows from Vesson Nautical, you can confidently make decisions to better manage risk and maximise profit. For over 20 years, Vesson has been co-innovating with the world's largest buyers and sellers of bulk freight. Join our client community and create your decision advantage. Learn more at vesson.com.
As seafaring becomes a seller's market, owners that have not already done so will need to up their game. Julia believes ship owners that see seafarers as an asset, not just a commodity, will be best positioned.
It is very much dependent on the factors that we just discussed. So, for example, if a ship owner creates the most attractive working conditions for the seafarer, they will, of course, be in a much better and stronger position to attract a higher number of qualified talents and thereby have less challenges with recruitment. On the contrary, owners who view seafarers as commodities as opposed to assets will tend to have greater challenges with recruitment. So the more the ship owner is appearing to invest in the well-being and the importance of the seafarer in terms of seeing them as an integral part of their operation, then those are the owners that will seemingly have less problems with recruitment. And that's a general rule, of course. It's not good to generalize, but it does make sense. If you're offering employment conditions that are favorable and above standard, chances are that owner will benefit greatly from having their pick of the best talent within the industry. Whereas the contrary would be the case for those who are not looking at investing in the seafarers' well-being or their training or their career development and simply go from port to port, just basically using seafarers as a commodity rather than, as I said earlier, seeing them as an asset.
So could the crewing crisis actually stop ships operating as seafarers become more choosy?
There is definitely things that individual companies can and are doing, and I could talk about some of the work that some of our customers are doing to try and kind of create the right working cultures and environments on board. And that's really crucial, because if you think about human needs, of course there are basics in there around kind of, the accommodation, the food you eat, the facilities, and a lot of those things are, I can't do anything to influence any of those things, but certainly we can work on the people element and look at how those kind of human needs are better fulfilled in a better environment and stuff like that. But industry wide, I mean, it's we have instruments available to us, but ultimately I don't see a situation where we would legislate, for example, around the quality of accommodation and that kind of stuff. Of course, things like MLC have tried to put in place safeguards around nutrition and around kind of varied meals and things like that, which I think are good things to do. But I think we are entering a phase now where the market will decide to a certain extent. We're already seeing a lot of seafarers just flat out rejecting working on vessels that don't have connectivity, for example. And I think as we get into a squeezed market and the war on talent intensifies, quite simply those companies that don't take care of their people in that way are not going to be able to operate. That's my opinion, that the market will ultimately decide which are the employers of choice, and those will get the best candidates, and they will get the best in terms of their operations and be able to excel.
So how can the industry attract a new generation of seafarers and tell the story about the positive aspects of a career at sea?
What you're asking there really is a question that sort of comes up increasingly, I would say, first bubbling up maybe sort of 18 months ago, or certainly my attention 18 months ago. I think there's been a long feeling for a long time that we're sort of reaping the whirlwind of having been quite happy to be a sort of secret little industry that nobody, that's keeping ourselves to ourselves and so on. And I think, certainly I think with in COVID, we had an opportunity where people suddenly realised perhaps a little bit more the importance of shipping. When shipping lanes are blocked, it makes the mainstream news and things like that. But otherwise, we are tucked away a little bit. And I think there's a growing recognition that no one company can really solve this problem. It has to be an industry-wide initiative. And there are good things that people are doing. I think ICS made a really wonderful film, which was designed to talk about a lot of the positives of a life at sea. Certainly, I believe very strongly this is a fantastic industry. I think it's one that people, once they're in it, they don't tend to leave. They tend to love it mostly because of the people, but also because of the opportunities. And so, there are not many sectors that you could go into where you could end up in charge at a very young age, in charge of the sort of multi-million-pound asset and so on. And so, and I think to my comment earlier about like the way the new fuels, or the fuels of the future, are not just about shipping; they are kind of worldwide. So I think there's an opportunity there. We're very good at creating skilled people and developing talent. So I think and we do have a real genuine impact in the world, and that's becoming more and more important to generations coming through. People need to have purpose. They like and are attracted to organizations that share their values and that kind of thing. So in the decarbonisation story, I think shipping has a great story to tell as well. So I think I certainly don't have the answer, but I think that one of the most interesting parts of the discussions that I've been privy to has been when we've said, well, we need to market the profession of seafaring. And it was actually Simon Grange of IceOne. I was chairing a panel last year in Manila, and he made this great point. He said it, articulated it really fantastically. He said, well, there's no point going to market unless we've really thought about the product and we've really got the product right. And I think that's a really great way of thinking about it. Because why do I say that? Because what we're actually looking at is how do people want to live and work? What are the demands? Generations coming through. It's really important. It's part of your psyche to be connected, to have an online profile, to have a life, a digital life. So we're not going to be able to attract people without that. So connectivity is an obvious one. But we're also really talking about trying to drive more women into maritime. Well, how are we going to do that unless we have some more of appreciation of flexibility in terms of careers and being able to build things around that? And I think those are just two examples. There are lots of ways which we need to reconsider perhaps the way we've designed the profession before we start to kind of try and get out there and market it.
Given that the industry is very fragmented, how can the industry join together? And what actions are ship owners and ship managers taking to improve cruise supply? Over to Julia.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. It is about the industry coming together. We are very much living in our own individual areas, and that is a problem. So as an industry, we need to prioritize the future talent. We are all running after the same markets. We are all moving the same cargoes. We are all facing the same issues we see with decarbonization. So if we are seeing regulatory bodies coming together and implementing various different requirements on our industry, we should also have the sense to come together and prioritize the future of the fleet. So education will be key from a primary school level to instill in the minds of youngsters the benefits of choosing a career at sea. And then it's up to the industry to ensure we follow through, where we make the job not only attractive, but we see seafarers as an integral part of the operation, integral part of the future. And again, going back to my initial assessment of commodities versus assets, seafarers are an asset. And when we get that mindset through, not only within our own industry, but when trying to attract talent and trying to market our industry, then I think there will be a positive shift. There's also a need to understand how seafarers today feel about their jobs so that the story they tell builds a positive story within the industry. And also outside of the industry. You know, it has its shortcomings, the maritime industry, but we still have an obligation to support and advocate for this industry through creating environments that are safe and inclusive. So, just to summarize that, I would say prioritization of future talent, getting our act together and coming together for the common good of the industry, and creating environments that are safe and inclusive so that we create a positive hype around why seafaring is a career choice that everyone can take advantage of. We're actually working on several initiatives. One being, again, going back to our two largest supply resources for seafarers, being the Philippines and India. We're looking at giving back to communities through education and by going to schools and also sponsoring and creating scholarships for the poorest of the poor. Not only are we advocating for our industry, but we're also helping make a difference to a great number of communities that would otherwise not have the ability to progress. So, by providing scholarships, allowing people to get an education where education is the foundation and cornerstone for anything, then of course we're creating opportunities for not only individuals, but for entire villages, in fact. So that's one way we're looking at it. We have, of course, cadetship programs and intern and trainee programs, which I would assume and believe that most of my competitors have today as well. So, in that respect, we are doing our bit to ensure we are training the future of the industry, not only recruiting the best of the best, but seeing them throughout their journey and ensuring that they have berths available so that when the time comes, we have people available who would develop their careers and then send them on their way to start their career within this environment.
With the industry now sourcing the majority of crew from Asia and the Indian subcontinent, could supply be increased from Western countries again?
Currently, recruitment in Europe is very low, simply because when the shift started happening, and when Western owners turned to alternative seafaring nations, that also created a bit of a vacuum effect where the few that were still available then either took shore positions, and then that market grew much, much smaller. So the reasons why Western owners, what two of the key factors why Western owners chose to have that shift was mainly down to retention and cost. So, if we're looking at seafaring as a career choice within, let's say, Europe, that then needs to have some kind of shift in mindset from the owners who are then willing to take on a higher cost, because obviously the cost of living is higher in Europe as compared to some of the developing nations where we are currently seeking seafarers. And that again is something that will not change overnight because it's an entire shift in mindset, both for ship owners and both for Europeans who would look at seafaring and perceive that as a good career choice amongst all the other opportunities they currently have today. So I don't necessarily see that happening tomorrow or a couple of years from now. If it were to happen, it would require a massive change in what we're actually seeing today in order to generate an interest, in order to ensure that they will be receiving the necessary salary benefits and packages that they would be welcoming in comparison to other career choices. So it would be an entire shift in my mind, unless the incentives are there from day one in order to make that shift happen a lot quicker and a lot sooner. But generally, I think we're going to see that the East and other regions other than Europe and North America will still be in the forefront of manning our vessels for several years to come.
So what other developments could help ship owners in reducing the impact of the crewing crisis? Over to Rahl Harris.
When we look at this, our background, we were a number of different companies that came together. My background in the learning and assessment kind of side, e-learning side. But then we sort of added in crew management business into that and a fleet management business. And what that did certainly for me is give me a much greater understanding of how all these different things fit together and how different stakeholders interact and so on. And I think that's been a journey that we've been on for the last few years. And I think what we've seen, and we've started to talk about this kind of human capital management idea, and we did a report earlier in the year on it. And that was really trying to get everyone to understand that people are kind of a fundamental all the way through that. And nothing that everything you're trying to do in your business is really instrumental to people are instrumental to that and their ability to perform. And that's really part of your bottom line. So rather than looking at sort of welfare and things like that, or investing in people from a sort of development point of view and looking at that as a cost, you're going to be looking at it much more as an investment. And so when people say human capital, some people kind of get a bit touchy about that and sort of say, well, isn't that a kind of a bit of a, aren't you being a bit sort of cynical about that? And the opposite is true, really. I actually think you're going to get a better delivery for people if you start to think about them as an investment and you start to see where they're really contributing to your bottom line. And to give you some idea of that, I think that quite often in companies, things are kind of disparate. You're not necessarily the people responsible for recruitment and the people responsible for learning and the people responsible, for the planned maintenance system. They're not necessarily looking at that in the round as a human kind of issue in terms of how you set that up. So really what we've tried to do is to look at those different aspects and the person from hire all the way through to retire, and where can you maximize their ability to be able to succeed. And so that's a big part around the people that you bring in the first place and understanding what their baseline is. And then how do you onboard them into your organization, not just in terms of the safety and stuff that you kind of say pre-safety stuff that you do, but also like what kind of organization they're joining, what's the expectation from them in terms of how you want them to behave and make the decisions that they make, and then looking at them as how you're going to build that up, because finding the right talent off the street is going to get increasingly more difficult. But actually thinking about how you kind of start somewhere, how you create things like a competency management frameworks, which is something that we do increasing amount with, of how you're going to actually get someone ready for that next job that you need them to do, and to kind of keep them in the organization, keep investing in them. So I think that's a big part of it, is actually trying to sort of get a better view of how that whole kind of piece fits together. And the second thing is designing the way in which people interact with things in a way that works for the kind of environment that we're in now. Now, obviously, good example of that is, I mentioned at the beginning, all the learning would happen up front in the old days. Now people are needing to learn new things all the time. So being able to put learning materials in their hand, literally in the sense of getting it onto their mobile phone and enabling them to then be able to access information at the point of need as they go through their career. I think that's an increasing focus for us as well, really personalizing that learning and going from learning being something that you just have to do to tick a box to being something that's actually instrumental in your ability to be able to succeed in the job that you're doing.
That's where we're going to leave it for this week. My thanks to Julia and Rahl for their contribution today. They're right, we have to start inspiring the next generation of seafarers to avert the crewing crisis we're heading for, or even already in the midst of. Thank you too to you, of course, for listening. We'll be back next week bringing you some reaction from the Global Maritime Forum's annual summit in Tokyo, where our editor-in-chief and regular podcast host Richard Mead is on the ground and gathering the key analysis for you. If you can't wait till then, you can get all of our podcast episodes on Spotify, SoundCloud, or wherever you get your podcasts, plus you can listen on our website too. But until then, stay safe and see you again next week.